Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis. I am the Director of Development here at CTC Software, and today we are excited to continue the PAL Admin Learning Series from the Nexus Suite. And in today's discussion, we're going to be focusing heavily on the ability for you to build your own custom dashboards in your own local environment, integrating whatever other data it is you want to implement. Now, we're going to talk about a stock way to do it, and we're going to lightly introduce if you want to dig a bit deeper. To do it in some other system other than our stock. Now, also, of course, these webinars are recorded. So if you want to come back to this later, or you have team members who you feel should be watching this, definitely make sure you check out our YouTube channel, subscribe there so you can be notified when these things go live. Also, as always, for those of you joining us live in the presentation, we try to answer questions while you ask them. And we also save a QA session for the end, of course, as well. So feel free to throw questions in the questions window here in GoToWebinar, and I'll be happy to try to answer those as we go. Without further ado, let's jump right on in. So we talked in previous sessions about how to gather data. We talked about organizing that data in some online dashboards using our project system and a bit about the navigation of those dashboards. But what I find for a lot of our customers is that you always want something different, something custom to you, and that's fantastic. So how do you go about getting more information from the Nexus PAL data? Because there's a lot that's there, and we can't necessarily show absolutely everything up in the stock portal. We show the general things that we find most people are interested in, kind of at entry level. So here today, we're going to talk about the toolkit that really allows you to leverage the Nexus REST API, which lets you get access to basically everything on the back end of Nexus. And today, we're going to focus on the project activity data. We're going to take and find a way to get that reporting data into a local data cache. We're going to be using Excel for that for today, and talk about some other options that you could choose to use. And then we're going to take a look at that data leveraging a stock custom report. It's kind of a oxymoron, right? Stock custom. Well, it's a stock report you can use as your baseline, and then you can feel free to customize it as much as you'd like. And we're trying to let you use this as easily as possible, because I understand fully that not everybody understands how to do coding or programming or interaction with REST APIs. And so the purpose of this today is to show you how, with nearly zero coding experience, all you got to do is copy paste like one thing, how you can get this to work for you. And so we're going to go through a couple of items today. We're going to talk about how to get access to this stock Nexus Reporting API dataset. This is just a baseline starting point for you that you can feel free to customize all day long. And then we're going to talk about how to get your organization credentials into the system and start pulling some data. And we're going to talk about customizing how much you want to go after a little bit with this as well. And then once that data is down, we're going to start investigating some of the types of data that's available and how this information is structured, so you have an idea of what you're looking at. And then we're going to pretty much right away transition over to Microsoft Power BI and take a look at the data in a more visual way rather than just spreadsheets on spreadsheets on spreadsheets. So that's the whole focus for this session in this webinar. First of all, let's talk about getting access to the data set. How do you do this? How do you get the stock information? And if you want more, how do you get more from it? So first off, you're going to start by going on to the CTC portal. You can go to ctcsoftware.com, use a little person to use your credentials and sign on. That's fantastic. Or you can just shortcut to ctcsoftware.com/portal. And a lot of our customers leverage this as their default landing page when they come to CTC Software. Just automatically has you sign in and gives you access to everything about the portal itself. When you're there, you might already have that page up. That's fantastic. You're going to want to navigate to the dashboard main menu item within the portal. And then you're going to select downloads, the little downloads drawer that's available there, and you're going to download the API support, data support package. Now let me go through this with you. I want you to see this happen live, because I'm going to do everything today live in this presentation. So I'm going to pull up the website. I'm just going to go to the CTC homepage here. So ctcsoftware.com. If you want to use the shortcut, fantastic, /portal. If you haven't yet signed on, it's going to ask you to sign on at this point. Doing portal is the exact same thing as hitting the little person over here and then going through the logon if you need to. This basically is a shortcut to /portal. It actually says in the toolbar at the bottom, my account, but it actually brings you to the portal. Now, if you have admin privileges or pretty much any kind of privileges and you can get to the dashboard area over here, this is where you want to focus. This is the dashboard section. It's the default spot you're going to land on when you go to /portal as well. It'll pretty much put you in the dashboard. And then you're going to navigate down to the little drawer here on the left-hand side in downloads. Now, don't get confused. There's another area for downloads. Top right corner downloads here, this is CTC application downloads. This is where you can download the BIM suites or Nexus suite itself or SIM suites or whatever. That's not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on the dashboard downloads specifically. This area here is where you can get access to the API toolkits, right? And there's more that's coming here, so keep your eyes peeled here if you want to dig in deeper with the APIs. Now, in this area, the port we're talking about today is the API data support package. Just download this. In fact, I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to download this file set. I'm going to go ahead and just, I'm going to paste this in a specific location for myself. I got a little Nexus reporting webinar folder here. Actually, I'm already there, which is fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Just going to save that download. You can see I've downloaded this a few times, a couple of, yesterday, today, whatever, downloaded a few times. We'll come back to that in just a minute. If you want to dig even deeper, we recommend that you leverage Postman. And we have a collection of little data sets inside of Postman that let you dig deeper. So if you have some coding experience and you want to know more about the REST API structure, go ahead and get Postman at x.com/getPostman and then download the little data kit for that as well. And this will be the CTC API Postman setup. Now, both of these are going to get an update in the not too distant future, but for now, if you download them, this will get you a really solid start and help you understand how these can work. So I've downloaded the one. Now let's go and extract that somewhere. So I'm here in my little Nexus reporting webinar folder, and this is the file that I just downloaded here at 12:06 today. I'm going to right click this V3 default, and I'm going to go ahead and extract it. Now, when I extract this by default, it wants to throw it into this little subfolder here. I've already got a little sort of Betty Crocker set up there just in case something goes sideways. So I'm going to throw this extraction right here live in the folder next to my Nexus reporting webinar and just extract that. So those files will show up right here. Now, there is a bit of a README, little README text file. Depending on your Excel environment, you might need to do some steps here. But I'm gonna open this up real quick, just a little README right there, README file, and it kind of talks about like what do you have to do to get this kind of working, to get this to refresh. Now I'm gonna be doing all of this today, so you can feel free to follow along with the README if you've just downloaded this file as well. But step one here is that we're basically gonna open up this Excel file. And before I really go too deep into this, you're gonna need something to be used in this file. So I'm going to talk about something else real quick here. Let's talk about getting access to your organization data, because you want to make sure it's your information you're seeing when you refresh this information set here in just a moment. So how do you actually access your organization data? First of all, you're going to download that kit. We just talked about that. I've already done that and extracted it, and I haven't yet opened up Excel, but once you open up Excel, you're going to need to have a reporting API key, your specific organization's reporting API key. Every organization's different, and this is going to get you access to your secure data. Nobody else will get access to your stuff that way. So for you to get that key, you want to reach out to licenserequest@ctcsoftware.com. Just reach out and say, hey, I'd like to get my reporting API key. If you have Nexus licensing, you can get your reporting key, just a part of that Nexus licensing. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything extra. You just got to ask for it, and they'll get you that API key for your reporting data from Nexus. Now, you're going to be entering this API key specifically into Excel's report API key parameter. And so we're going to be doing this together here in just a moment. I've actually just copied my key on the other monitor just so I have it at my fingertips here in just a moment. Now, The goal here when we're in this area entering the API key is we're going to specifically establish how much data, how much time of data, that is how far back in history to go, because our portal only does 30 days, right? That's the default in the portal is 30 days. And it's the only option in the portal. Well, maybe you want 60 days, maybe you want 90 days, maybe you want 6 months, maybe you want a year, 2 years, you name it. You can choose what you want to decide how much data, how far back to go fetch, and specifically what kind of data. Do you want CMS data, PAL data, cloud shared licensing data, just user data? You name it, you choose, it's up to you. This is highly customizable in this Excel file. And so we're gonna make those choices. And then before we actually tell it to fetch the data, we're gonna save the Excel file. Just so that stuff's locked in, those options are locked in. And then we're gonna tell it to refresh. We're gonna give it some time to go ahead and do that. And once that data all refreshes, we're gonna go ahead and save the Excel file again. So let's get this process started. Let me take you through the process in Excel specifically. So here's my XLSX file. Just a basic Excel file. There's no macros in here, nothing super magical. There's some magical things happening, but it's just Excel, quote unquote, just Excel. There's some Power Query things that I already wrote for you, but you'll see those here in just a moment. Now, when you first open this up, by default, this was extracted from a zip file. It probably doesn't understand that you're supposed to be able to edit it yet. So it says, hey, there's some information that might be coming from the internet. Of course, any internet-based data could potentially contain viruses if you're actually telling it to execute stuff. We're just fetching some data from basically a data repository, just an online web database. And so there's nothing that's going to run that's dangerous inside this file here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Enable Editing. There was another thing here. It says there's some content, some data connections that have currently been disabled. Well, you don't want them disabled. You need them to be enabled. And so we're going to go ahead and enable that content. Now, I've already modified some of my Excel environment. There's another option that you might see pop up about data privacy. You need to enable all of the data that's coming through, otherwise it will skip some things. So if you get that third pop up about data privacy, let it do everything, enable all, and that'll get you all the information. Now, the main step here is to enter the API key into a report API key parameter, but you got to figure out how to find that, right? Like that's tricky sometimes. Where you're going to go is right here at the top. There's a data tab. This is where all of Excel's external data references can come from. And in fact, we're going to be focusing heavily on this queries and connections spot right here. And there's a queries and connections little panel. If you click on that, it's going to open a side panel here to the right. Now, there's going to be a lot of stuff here. It takes it a second to refresh. We'll see this thing spin in just a moment. It says 0 queries by default, but that's just because Excel is fetching all of the information. It's going to take a second. Here we go. There's 79 queries in total. There's 46 primary queries. We're going to collapse this for a minute. We'll come back to that. There's 13 parameters to take a look at. And right here in the parameters is all of the areas that we're going to want to make some kind of choices. Maybe not in everything, but in some places. And so I'm going to take this report key here, this report API key, that's the field that you're going to need to enter, and it doesn't have any real data yet in it. So we're going to paste into here your company's reporting API key that you got from the licensing request. And so I'm going to go here to the current value and I'm going to replace that completely with my license key. Now, you can technically use this. I don't care. It's going to show you some data, but here's the deal. Look, it's my data. It's not your data. You're not going to really draw any information from it, any insights from it. Other than that, I don't do production. That's about all you're going to draw from it. So I would recommend making sure you get your licensing key so you're actually getting your data. Now, there's a couple of other things here to take a look at. One thing that I like to do just early on to give us the fastest possible refresh the very first time around is I change my search date offset here. Instead of 30, which is the default 30 days back in history to go fetch, I like to change this to just 1. This basically gives me my data from today so that when I actually tell this to refresh, it'll fetch 1 day worth of information. It'll be the fastest possible refresh depending on what I'm going after. Now, in the next little subset of collections here, there's a couple of get statements here. Get accounts tables. Do you want to get users and groups? Generally speaking, you do. Get content management system tables. By default in this file, it's set to false. And the details for that content management system as well, set to false. And the search details set to false. Now you can toggle these on if you are interested in the CMS data. That's totally fine. But for today's example, I'm ignoring all of this. The next one down here is get cloud shared licensing, or CSL tables, and that is by default set to true, since most people when they first come into this file are probably most interested in cloud shared licensing data, but that's not really what we're focused on today. Today, we are focused on the project activity logger data. So we're going to get the PAL tables, which by default is set to false. We're going to set this to true. It's kind of a master key. Any of these that just talk about the general data like CMS tables, if this is false, you get no CMS data at all. Even if some of these sub options here, the details and the search details is set to true, it won't matter. This will say false. It doesn't fetch it in the first place. The get doc session details currently is also set to true right now. That was there actually by default because the PAL tables was off by default. But if these are both true, you're going to get all of the information that you want pretty much from the project activity logger data. It's going to try and fetch pretty much everything. And so we're getting accounts data, which is nice because we'll be able to tie real usernames and groups to some of the project activity logger data down here. We'll know who is actually posting the log data and what projects perhaps they have got some access to and things like that. Now there's an entire sub area here. If you want to go super detailed and you want to know specifically what exactly is being fetched, you can go ahead and get some more data. Now you can see here, for example, in the doc session data, I'm not including printing data. I am not including super detailed warnings. And in fact, I probably never would include super detailed warnings. It just inflates your data set unnecessarily. I'm not including things like document project change. Actually, I am including that. I'm not including crash data or add-in data right now. You could choose to include those if you wanted to. You have to edit this and basically switch that from false to true. It's a little more difficult to do it here than it is in these other ones where I put some top level things. But if you really want to dig deep and you really want to go granular and control what's what, you can do that here in this extra table. But you still have to be getting PAL tables in the first place for any of those to do anything at all. Let's just stick with the defaults here out of this file because that's going to give most people the most value in most cases. So again, I have my search date offset right now set to 1. I'm going to come back here in a moment and switch this, but let's just hit close and load. It's not going to actually load anything. It's not going to refresh anything just yet. Remember when I was in that PowerPoint over there, I said first thing before you actually refresh, hit save. We're going to do that right now. I'm hitting save. And then I'm going to click refresh all. After that save is complete, I'm going to do refresh all. Now, for 1 day of data, it usually comes back pretty darn quick. But that little wheel is going to spin for a minute, and it's going to, down here you might see retrieving data. And it's going to say that until it actually finishes retrieving all of the information. Now, I happen to be on a CMS tab by default. When I opened this file, it was last saved from some CMS tab, and this isn't where I want to be. So eventually, I'm going to navigate over to one of the PAL tabs here in just a moment. But this data right now is doing a refresh. It's going to take however long it takes for that 1 day of information, and then I will be able to go investigate some stuff. Usually when you start seeing, you might be able to see this in the recording, the flickering down here at the bottom, that basically tells me that it was refreshing a bunch of data here in the file. And ultimately, once that is done, usually that means that it's ready for me to go look at something inside of here. And I can't actually click around yet. Excel's still locked up. So it's still doing something. We'll come back to that in a minute. While we're waiting for that to finish up, let's talk about understanding some of the data that's in here. I'm going to introduce you to this, and then we're going to go back and refresh that in a moment. So understanding data capabilities. What is the data that is actually going to be here? And kind of like, what are we looking at when this information begins to refresh? Well, the purpose of this Excel file is to be used primarily and pretty much exclusively as a local data cache. It grabs a certain set amount of information from the cloud, from the web, and it pulls it into a little local data set that you can use to query and work with much, much more efficiently. Now, this is truly raw data from a relational database up in the cloud. Now, I might be using terminology you're not entirely familiar with. That's okay if you don't fully understand. You don't have to. What I am saying though, if I'm like relational database and you're like, yeah, relational database, I want to work with that. I don't want to work with Excel. That's cool too. You can choose to store all of this data instead of in Excel in something like a SQL database, a structured query language, relational-based database. And that would provide you way better performance than Excel does. Excel is actually a pretty poor data structure when we're talking about huge amounts of data. If you're going to go fetch 2 years worth of information for your company, fantastic, more power to you. If you're going to go fetch all the project activity logger data and the CMS data, the licensing data for 2 years, you need something better than Excel. When you get to that point, reach out, let's have a conversation, and we can talk about some of the strategies you could potentially use. But understand, you're probably going to have to learn a little bit of coding, a little bit of data interaction, or have some kind of data management system that'll let you kind of work with this locally. I know some of my customers use tools like Domo, some use SQL Server, some use PostgreSQL. There's a lot of different things you could use. That's not really the focus of today, but I wanted to mention it in case somebody was going to ask the question like, hey, where else could I store this stuff? This data can go anywhere you want. I'm using Excel because it's accessible by the most people we find, at least early on. Now, most of these tables, I'm air quoting that on my side despite you not being able to see that, they are represented by Excel tabs in this case, and they kind of talk to each other sort of in the real relational database. They reference information back and forth using some ID values, and we do that to sort of reduce the amount of repetition of information, right? I don't have to store the user email address or user first and last name on every single tab. I can just store a pointer to them and understand some information about that user, and I can reference all of their core user information really easily. So we use a lot of ID values in this table. Now, it's not really interesting to look at from a table point of view. I totally understand. That is not really the intent to look at this from a table's point of view, as some of us find interesting stuff that way. But really, the whole point of this is to get that local data cache so you can represent this in graphs in some interesting way. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, before I do that, I want to start investigating some of this information so you can see kind of what's going on. So over here to the far right, I have things like doc session data. Now, though, keep in mind, this is only for a single day right now. That's all I fetched was 1 day. And in 1 day, in my case, I have 11 document session records, and I can see, what was opened, what wasn't, what files were accessed, all kinds of information. When the logging actually took place, this is all within the last 24 hours. I could see potentially which Revit project models it was, what username on the machine was actually accessing this, what the server was that it was on. Like, there's all kinds of information here, which can be kind of interesting. And then each of these has a doc session ID. So it's got a session ID, and over here in the events, that doc session ID is going to be referenced. You may very well not see model names over here and model paths repeated over and over again because that information is stored back here on this tab referenced by this ID. But I can see all the things that took place, like what was synced to central, when did it start, when did it end, when was it opened, when, what was their view switching, what kind of views were switched to. All kinds of information is available here, how long those things took, how long they spent in specific views. There's all kinds of data that is here in this sort of big spreadsheet of information. Now this, again, I do not expect you to investigate and interrogate this data here from Excel. Not very interesting, but I did want to point out there's a lot of information that's available here. There's also some summaries about how much time was spent in each session, summarized by hours. There's information about what links were loaded into those individual doc sessions, into those individual project models that were open. There's information about the machines that were used, so what their hardware information was. You can use this from a purchasing point of view to understand, is the hardware the bottleneck and why some of these projects might be responding really slowly. There's some summary data about general counts of information in here, how many rooms, how many purgeable families or non-purgeable families or in-place families or views not placed on sheets, right? There's tons of data that is available here for each of these, and you can choose how to interrogate that. Again, this is just a big table, not very sexy at this point in time, right? There's doc session view types that are available here. So like what kinds of views were available, what views were the user spending time in, how many actions were taken in those views. There's stuff like warning summaries here. What are the warnings? What items are affected? How many items are affected? Information about, again, some session data, some project data, some pathing for projects and what paths are associated to which projects, permissions that are assigned from the web portal, who's got view rights, who's got manager rights, all of the data, right? Everything that you could possibly want about the project activity logged data that's in the back end, you have all of it, access to all of it with these tables. That's the purpose. Now, let me get this refreshing one more time. I want to go for a slightly larger data set here. Let's just say I want 180 days. Now, if you wanted this to be 365 days, if you want this to be, what is that, 730 days, 730, you could go after as much as you absolutely want to go after. You just type in a number here and it's going to go that number of days back. Understand, the more days you decide to fetch, the longer it's going to take to actually do the refresh for that PAL data. So in my case, I'm going to do 6 months of data, 180 days here in this case. I'm going to save and close this. And then I'm going to save once again, just so I have this data kind of there and ready for me to use in just a moment. But then I'm going to refresh my data and let this cook. This will probably take at least 2 minutes to probably go fetch this and cache it locally. In the meantime, let's go find a more interesting way of looking at this data. Power BI is how I personally prefer to look at this data. I find it far more interesting than looking at big, massive tables and dumps of information. So we're going to take a look at this in Power BI. What I'm going to do is actually open up the Power BI file that comes along with this set of information. And I'm going to tell it to actually pull its data from this Excel file right here. So I'm going to go Shift right click in Windows, and I'm going to copy the path, copy as path for this file right here. So I know the exact file that I'm going to be dealing with. And then I'm going to use that as a parameter, as a property inside this Excel file. See, I've already linked all of that data for you, and I've given you some sort of default graphs and things that you can use, but I fully expect you to customize this. You go have fun. This is fully editable by you. You can change, delete, modify, like you do whatever you want in here. Add your own reports, do all your own stuff. If you don't like my formatting and my color backgrounds, great, you go change it. This is for you. Now, I'm not going to dig super deep into Power BI and all of its intricacies and how to build custom graphics. There is so much available in the YouTube space on how to work with Power BI. I am not that expert, and I don't really want to be that expert. I can be dangerous in here. I can do some interesting stuff, but you're probably going to have some very interesting ideas of how you want to present your data, and I encourage you to do that. And if you've got questions about like where do I find some piece of information, like look, reach out. We're here for you on that. Now in Power BI, you can go to editing the data source here, actually looking at the Power Query editor and all those things like we did in Excel. But Power BI actually makes this really nice, really convenient. You can just click Edit Parameters, and it gives you access to the parameters themselves. Man, I tell you, I really wish Excel had this feature, but they don't. So our version 4 of this whole entire environment is going to make this just a little bit easier for you. But Power BI just makes this so simple. With the Excel side, it's not quite as simple. So I'm going to paste that path inside of here, and then I'm very intentionally getting rid of the double quotes before the path and the double quotes at the end of the path. See, when you copy as path from Windows, something that I did a moment ago, it always puts quotes on both sides, and this doesn't want the quotes. So I'm just going to go in here and just get rid of the quotes at the end and the beginning, and then I'm gonna click OK. And it tells me that it hasn't actually applied that yet. When I click apply, it's gonna do a little bit of a refresh. So let's go ahead and do this right now. It's gonna ask that Excel file, the last saved version of that Excel file, for all of its information. And it's gonna create the connection in this model, in this Power BI space. And it's a pretty small file, right? It's 290K. This refresh is super fast. And that's why I do this in sort of a two-step process. That's the very intentional choice. Excel is the local data cache because Excel is far better at handling data than Power BI is, than handling the fetching of data. And Power BI is far better at representing that data. So now, again, I mentioned earlier, SQL is even better than Excel, and that is very true. And you can update this Power BI file to reference SQL if you really wanted to once you get the data in there. Different story, different webinar, honestly. But the whole goal here is that you can very easily get that information linked up. And now I have in here 1 day of information available to me. So if I was to go over to something like my PAL project summary, I have some information here that I can begin to navigate. There's only one file in the last day that was accessed for a particular project, but I have 1 day of information. Now, I think my Excel file is probably done. Yep, it's done. So it's got 180 days of information now. Let me resave this file because it now has quite a bit of information in here. It's got, days and days. Well, this is PAL project permissions, but if I go to something like PAL warning summary, it has quite a bit of information, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000 rows of information inside of this file, this one tab. It's got view information for what views people were spending their time in. It has doc session summaries available here for hundreds of document sessions from our company in the past 180 days, right? So I'm saving this so that it's ready to go. And then when I jump back into Power BI, instead of this only being 1 day of information, I can refresh this again. It's gonna take only like half a second longer because that file is still really tiny. And in Power BI, it's gonna fetch now, instead of a 290 meg file, it's gonna fetch or K file, it's gonna fetch a 390K, so like 100K more. Not a big deal, still super small. Let's save this. Now I have all kinds, for that same exact project that I had selected over here, now I have all kinds of central models that were accessed in the past 6 months. I have a total number of 389 session hours instead of like 1 session hour from the past 3 months. 1 day versus 9 months is pretty significant difference, right? So now I can start to click through and look at different projects, look at different large file sizes from those projects, start to understand who's working in those projects and how much time they've spent. This is all information I can start to understand. And when I'm using the term projects in this context, I'm talking about all of the Revit project models that relate to a single project, a single logical project. There might be architectural models, structural models, MEP models, you name it, they're all a part of it. Whatever project models are stored in a specific set of paths, as we've mapped, last webinar we talked about mapping paths in the project space, they're all now associated here, and you can quickly view information about who's working where. This is all interactive. I can start to click through and see like, oh yeah, this particular model has been worked on primarily by, looks like Sean, like me. I've been working on this model. There's a few others who have been in there as well, but I can kind of see who's working where and like what the file size and percentage of file size is total today versus over time, what it was. There's a lot of information that's kind of available here really quickly at your fingertips, right? Now you can start to go over here to the model summaries and understand for a discrete model what's going on. Let's pick the one that I was working in today, but that has a bunch of time. I guess it's only been open for a maximum of 1 hour total. The average open time is 45 minutes. Sorry, maximum open 1 hour, average open time 45 minutes, give or take. Max save time, that's interesting. It's been less than 1/3 of a minute for the max save time. The average save time is like 2 seconds. That's pretty interesting. Max warnings and minimum warnings, 64. It's been pretty consistent for the warnings there. It's pretty interesting as well. I can see some general data about this discrete Revit project model. I can see a breakdown of the views. I can see a breakdown of the links that exist inside of that Revit project model. And me as a BIM manager, I never have to open that project technically. I can just go here to this report and see what my users are doing because PAL is just giving me this data, serving it up on a silver platter. I can see over time how this particular Revit project model has been performing. So I can see there's a lot of different session changes here for the warnings. If I click on one of these warning sessions here, I can isolate that specific day. This is actually today. This was me working in the model earlier today. I can see that it opened kind of on a specific average amount of time there. I can see what the max open time was 0.85 minutes for that particular model. I can see the sync to central times here. Here's that 0.33 maximum sync to central time, and the average is someplace there in the middle of time. I can see the file size change throughout the day, whether a person compacted or not. I can see that the warnings have changed over time. If I unselect that particular day of warnings, I can see over time how this has changed. I can see that it's kind of increased in file size right around here, and then it kind of jumped up for a little while and came right back down today. I can see the sync to central times over time. Again, the one day where the syncs to central kind of cluster up pretty close there, open times as well, but that's where that highlighting of a specific day here in the Power BI space can be kind of interesting. And again, you can have full customization over all of this data. I can see the detailed information about this model performance. So if I wanted to highlight today, I can know exactly what machine people were on, what their computer information was. I'm kind of blocking that out right now, kind of on purpose, but you can see some of the model info again down here. You can pick any Revit project model you want and start to highlight this information. Understand exact views people were spending their time on for these syncs to central, understand the exact warnings inside of those models. Boy, I tell you, there's a lot of information here. You can use this to isolate what users are in the model and exactly which models they spend their time in, how much time they spend on those models, how many hours they spent on a particular project, see exactly what models they're accessing discretely, how many changes they've been making inside of those discrete specific models. Some people might just open up a project model and make no changes. They just happen to have it open. They're just looking at some data and they're not actually necessarily making changes. They might just, like I do a lot of presentations and navigate around. You might be doing the same thing there. You can see specifically what views are in use and in production in projects. Again, down to the actual model, exactly what user is spending how much time in what views and how many discrete edits they're actually making in those specific views. Little graphs out there about that. There's all kinds of information, and there's more. There's more that I haven't even talked about. Again, you can get add-ins data on people's computers. You could get project coordinate switches in the model. I was actually looking at that earlier today. I was noticing over here in my document sessions, if I go back over here, because somebody asked me this, and so I went looking for it. Can I know exactly what the coordinates are in the model? The answer is yeah, without you ever opening it up. You can know what the project base point is. You can know what the survey point location is, the site lat and long, if there's been a rotation. You can understand all of this information, and you as a manager never had to open the model, and you can see exactly when it changed and who was working in the model when that changed. So if somebody updates the shared coordinate position or something, you can find that information out, which is pretty meaningful. You can understand which work sets are editable, how much time they've been spending opening in total for that particular model. Like, there's a lot of data just sitting there waiting for you to use for whatever purposes you have for whichever models are in your ecosystem, right? So that's the whole point of this, is that you've got access to a lot of data. You can look at it raw data, you can look at it very interestingly in visual methods out here, all up to you as to how you want to investigate this. And then all of this in Power BI, 100% customizable by you. You've got access to all kinds of visualization toolkits here. Again, go check out YouTube for how that all works. You've got access to tons and tons of different fields of information that are just available there for you. Go check that stuff out. Try it out. Go in there and begin to customize reports that are meaningful for you. Maybe you want to marry up Deltek Vision data in here as well, time tracking versus what they're actually spending in models. You can find that information out in a single Power BI environment, leveraging multiple data sets. The sky is truly the limit when you start digging deeper into information and you learn how to start interrogating that information. You can get a lot of value and a lot of insight as to how your teams are working, maybe where you need to invest some time in training, maybe where you need to invest some time in machines, in the actual hardware and the environment. This can inform a lot of different decision-making capabilities here. So last time we talked about the stock reporting. Now we're talking about letting you get your toes dipped into the introduction of custom reporting. And if, again, I'll mention this one last time here, if you want to dig even deeper and you want to know how to take this outside of Excel and Power BI, maybe you want to go into Domo, maybe you want to go into PostgreSQL and Tableau. I don't know, you do whatever you want. This Postman collection here will help you far better understand all of the capabilities of the entire reporting API. And if you do have any questions, we encourage you to reach out and ask about that. So we're gonna probably wrap this up here right about now. For those of you watching this as a recording, I wanna say thank you. We hope you found this information valuable, useful for you to better navigate this reporting environment. And we hope it earns a like and a subscribe from you on this YouTube channel. And we hope to see you next time around as well when we're continuing on this series.